This week's Sedra is Kisavo, and Kisavo starts about the Pasha of Mikra Bikurim, when the first fruits were brought, and then it goes into what in the Mishnah is called Vidu Maestros. In other words, every 3-4 years, the fourth year, there's a process of 3 years of taking off Maestros. And on the fourth year, the Jew has to declare that he distributed his maestros to the Levi, to the poor. It was eaten in Yerushalayim, whatever the case might be, that he acted properly in doing it. He did not use the maestros for the needs of someone who was dead, for burial. The maestros were not consumed, were not eaten in a state when a person was an onan in the early stages of mourning. And what is interesting is the whole parsha of maestros is I did. You shall say before God, your God, I have removed the holy things from the house. I have distributed the maestros to where they're supposed to be distributed. And I have given them to the Levite, to the ger, to the orphan, and to the widow, according to the commandments that you commanded me. I have not transgressed any of your commandments. I followed all the particulars of the halachos of maestros, and I have not forgotten. I have not eaten of it in my intense mourning. I did not consume it in a state of contamination. I did not give it for the needs of the dead. I have hearkened to the voice of Hashem, my God. I have acted according to everything you commanded me. So Vidu Maestros manifests itself in saying, God, I did what you said. Now, the popular Vidui is like the Vidui of Yom Kippurim, after a person sinned. And their Vidui is the very opposite. Their Vidui, and literally Vidui means like a confessional prayer or beseeching for help. So, because of my sins. So there we say, Al Fanecha, because of the sin that I didn't listen to what you told me, God. What do we say in Yom Kippurim? We ask God for forgiveness. Forgive us. So it's very interesting that the term vidui that is used in regard to the vidui that we say like on Yom Kippur, that we say after when we recognize that we sinned, that we say when we give a sacrifice because of the sin that we did, which manifests itself in admitting that I did not act properly and delineating what I did wrong. You see how long the Vidu Yom Kippurim is. And Vidu is not just the mitzvah on Yom Kippur. The halach is anytime one recognizes that he sinned, he has to say, "Ana Hashem, please God, chatasi, avisi, pashati fanecha, I sinned before you. And I am embarrassed about it, and I regret it, and I will never do it again." So the simple meaning of vidui is I acted wrong. And still our sages, when they talk to the statement that a person says when he declares that he gave the maestros, he distributed the maestros, and he acted properly with them, and he did not act against the halacha regarding the laws of maestros, is the very opposite. I did everything you commanded me regarding the maestros. So how is it that the same term, vidui, which describes admission of sin, of mistakes that I made, of regrets that I had, is used to describe when the person says, I acted properly in regard to the maestros. Now, maestros was the tithes that was taken. Some of them were given to Levite. 1/10 of the produce that was grown in Eretz Yisrael was given to the Levite. There was Ma'aser Sheni that the person himself would take to Jerusalem and eat in Jerusalem, and Ma'aser Ani. There was a tithe twice in the 7-year process that was given to the poor. So it was. But it's a declaration. I acted properly. I did the right thing. And still the same terminology is used. Now, the one who asks the question of the Rishonim is the Seforna. And the Seforna, he says something very, very strange. He says that originally, the ones that who had the mandate of doing the avoda, of doing the service, of handling the korbanos, was not the Kohanim and the Leviim. It was not Shevet Levi. It was the Bechorim. It was the eldest son. And the Torah tells us that the Leviim, as a result of the sin of the Egel Hazav, of the golden calf, where the eldest sons were involved, and Shevet Levi was not involved. So because of that, the service of the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, whoever it was, in the Mishkan, it was taken away from the Bechorim, it was taken away from the first sons, and given over to the Levite, the tribe of Levi. So he says, when I stand and I say the Parsha Bikurim, when I declare that I did everything in accordance with what you told me, I gave it to the Levite, I gave it to the poor, it's also a declaration that I recognize. When I give it to the Levite, I recognize ideally, I shouldn't be giving it to the Levite. I should have been giving it to the Bechorim. I should have given it to the eldest sons, who initially were the ones who had the mandate of doing the service of God. But it's because of our sins and the sins of our ancestors. And I'll quote you the words: "B'chata'enu v'avonos avosenu husra ha'avoda." The service was taken away from the Bechorim. So because of that sin, so when I say I'm giving it to the Levite, I gave it to the Levite. In a sense, I'm saying I gave it to the Levite, even though had I acted properly, had my ancestors acted properly, so I would be giving this maestros, this tithe, I would be giving it to the Bechorim, to the eldest son. But unfortunately, because of my sins and the sins of my ancestors, I'm giving this tithe. I'm giving this tithe to the Levite. But nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I have complied with the laws as you dictated them. So nevertheless, even though it's not being done in the original manner that it should have been done, please, from your holy place, look and bless us, the children of Israel. So this is how the Seforna explains that why the Parsha Bikurim, the Parsha where we declare that we acted properly with the tithes, is given, is referred to by our sages as Vidui Maestros, as the admission prayer. All right, the explanation is somewhat strange because there is no reference to the Egel Hazav, but I'm not going to focus on that. We could say that, in a sense, the golden calf, the fact that it's implied, but what bothered me more than anything else was the expression of the Sforna. The Sforna says, "B'chata'enu v'avanos avosenu." As a result of our sin and the sins of our ancestors, as a result of our sin and the sins of our ancestors, the service was removed from the Bechorim, from the firstborn, and given over to the Levites. And the question is, that was thousands of years ago. We can understand to a certain degree, not that there wouldn't be questions about that also. If you say, Ba'avanos Avosenu, the sins of our ancestors. But why does he say, B'chata'enu, as a result of our sins? How would the Jews in the second temple or in the first temple, when they brought when they recited the parsha? So how could they say, as a result of our sins, it was taken from the Bechorim, from the service in the Beis Hamikdash, was taken from the Bechorim, from the first sons, and given over to the Leviim, to the tribe of Levi. Avonos Avosenu, we understand that our ancestors, they made a golden calf. Now, and then secondly, what good is our vidui, our admission prayer for a sin that was committed by our ancestors? But the truth is, this question makes us wonder. Now, Yom Kippur, we say Yizkor, and I should point out that Yizkor Yom Kippur is different than Yizkor on the other holidays. On the other holidays, matter of fact, the Sephardic custom might have changed, I don't know. The Sephardic custom was to say their form of Yizkor only in Yom Kippur. On the other holidays, we always say it on Shmini Atzeres, we say it on the last day of Pesach, we say it on the last day of Shavuos, we say Yizkor also. But that was a custom that developed much later because of the oppression and the murders of the Jews of Europe, that I guess when the holiday came, initially you confronted the empty seats at the table, the people who were massacred, whether it was in the time of the Crusades or in the time of Chumensky, Tachvatat, and in the holidays, that in those days families would get together and they would see the empty seats of those who were massacred. So the custom developed. This is my theory. The custom developed to say Yizkor, to remember them, because seeing the empty seats and not remembering them openly causes greater pain and would be a greater negation of the joy of Yom Tov. But originally, Yizkor was only on Yom Kippur. Why was it only on Yom Kippur? But in regard to Egla Rufa, the Torah says, Kaper la'amcha Yisrael, hachayim v'hamesim. Kaper la'amcha Yisrael, atone for your nation Israel. So our sages say, Hachayim v'hamesim. We ask God to give atonement, not just for those who are alive, but for those who died. Asher Padisa, who you redeemed. So Chazal sages tell us it goes even to the Jews who went out of the land of Egypt. And the question is, okay, so that's why we say Yizkor, because Yom Kippur is a day of kapara, as the name says. It's the day of atonement. And when we seek atonement, we are not just seeking atonement for ourselves, but we're seeking atonement for the past generations as well. But the question is, what good? How is it? In what position are we that we can ask for kapara, that we can ask for atonement for those who passed away? And I think there are two answers, and one is not exclusive of the other. I think they're both true. Yom Kippur is a day, the Rambam says, it's a day of tshuva, it's a day of repentance, a day of return to God, la yochid u'larabim, for the individual as well as the multitudes. To put it, it's for the individual as well as the nation. And when we speak about the nation of the Jewish people, we are speaking not just of the Jews of this generation, but figuratively, when the Jews of this generation, among them, a tzibur doesn't die. A community, so long as there's a community there, it lives. A nation lives. As a nation, the Jewish people of previous generations are still alive. As individuals, they die. But they remain part of the nation. Today's nation is the same nation as yesterday. In Yom Kippur, we ask for atonement. We ask for atonement not only for ourselves as individuals, but we ask for the nation, for the community. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sins that we, the Jewish people, did. It's in the plural form. So in a sense, and the sins of the nations of the world, the sins of the former generations are part of the sins of the nations. And to a certain degree, we could say, Chatosenu, when the Sephorna says, Chatosenu, our sins, he's talking to our sins as a nation. So the sins that were committed generations ago are still there. Because in a sense, when I sin, it's not just that I am sinning. The nation of the Jewish people are sinning. So the sin is still there. So because of that, we have to ask for atonement, because when we approach God, we not only approach God as individuals, but we approach God as the nation of the Jewish people. And for the most part, approaching God as the nation of the Jewish people, on the contrary, is an advantage. But coming along because our ancestors had many merits that we don't have. And when we approach God as a nation, to a certain degree, we share those merits as well. But when we approach God as an individual, only as an individual, we just have our own records. But when we approach God as a nation, we also have to assume responsibility as a nation, not only for the merits, but for the sins of former generations as well. And there is And so by both by Yom Kippur and by Maishros, Chata'enu, that the Sforno says, our sins doesn't necessarily mean our sin, me as an individual, but it could mean our sins, the sins of the Jewish people, uva'avonos ha'avosenu, and the sins of our ancestors, their individual sins of the generation of the golden calf. But I think there's another way to explain it. And that explanation could perhaps be used to explain the first explanation as well. In other words, we are required on Yom Kippur, as I mentioned, to ask for atonement for the sins of our ancestors. And the question is, why should we be required to ask for atonement? And that's the reason Yom Kippur, they used to say Yizkor, that Yizkor was recited on Yom Kippur. And it's interesting that in the Tochacha, it says, it's not in this week's Sedra, Vizvadus chatosam veschatos abosam. The Jewish people in exile will say vidui for the sins, their sins and the sins of their ancestors. And we have to understand, we have one explanation, but there might be an additional explanation. How do we say vidui? How do we say the confessional prayer? How do we ask to be forgiven for the sins of our ancestors? How does it make sense? It doesn't make sense, it seems. But we could suggest that the reason is because the sins that our ancestors did has an impact on us. Somehow there is an impact that is given over from generation to generation. Some of it comes probably because of our hero worshiping of our ancestors. And we certainly should look up to our ancestors. But at the same time, we have to realize that our ancestors made mistakes also. Not as many mistakes as we made. And certainly not with the intentions that we did. Although that might vary from situation to situation. But, and this is not only because, to use an expression that some of the psychologists use, there is a national consciousness. But even without that idea, which is, I think, Medrash can only be understood with this idea of a national consciousness. But even without that, the way our ancestors acted, somehow it's transmitted to future generations. And we say in the Vidui, Aval anachnu va'avoseinu chatanu. We don't just say we sinned. We say our ancestors sinned as well. Sometimes they weren't aware of the facts that we are aware. Let us take a look at the resistance of the Jewish people. And I'm not finding fault, but not finding fault is not to be confused with not recognizing a mistake. Some of our ancestors did not recognize, and I'm talking only 2 generations ago, or 1 generation ago, the need for a state of Israel, the need to recognize that we don't have to remain in the same spot generation after generation in exile. Go to a safer place. Schor Yemo Solam. Remember the past. There are mistakes that we made. And not to talk about the mistakes that we made ourselves. And somehow, even after recognizing the mistakes, we continue to make the same mistakes again. We find excuses to differentiate. Do we need to look any further than our situation today with the COVID-19? People recognize the dangers. And for a short while, everybody became careful. They were scared. But then, as those that were diagnosed with this disease, the number became less. So people became less careful. And people began to say, herd immunity. When it came to a simple shaila and halacha that did not involve life and death, they would be more careful. But when it comes to involve life and death, as I mentioned last time, chamira sakanta meisura, we have to be more stringent with danger than with halachos. There, all of a sudden, herd immunity, because somebody writes an article in a newspaper. Maybe there's herd immunity already. They risk not only their lives, but the lives of many others. And it was only a short while ago that we looked in the Jewish press releases, one obituary after another obituary. But why? Because we want to believe. It's like the person who'll take meat that he doesn't know it's kosher, but it doesn't say not kosher. Maybe it is kosher. Would anybody say that? Because maybe somebody wrote an article that, and it happens at times, that kosher meat might have been that the kosher meat might have been sold by a company and it wasn't labeled kosher. So because of that, you take a risk. So when it comes to life and death questions, and then I saw it's absolute nonsense that was written by rabbis that when it comes to davening, you have to wear a mask. But when you're learning with your chavrusa across the table, and you know there is a concept of milchamta shel Torah, and when anybody walks into a beis medrash, you hear the screaming, and that's good. Then you don't have to wear a mask. I don't know. Can someone explain the lumdus to the city you see to me? And then they say, oh, we checked with a doctor. I think they should suggest that the doctor had his license checked. So the mistakes, we have to recognize There were mistakes that were made. And the previous generations, some of those mistakes that were made might not have been their fault. They didn't have the experience that we had. History moves much quicker now. But future generations, the mistakes, though, seem to have an impact on us. The previous generations did not know the importance of a state of Israel. Because, yes, there were pogroms, but the Jewish people survived those pogroms. But we saw what happened in World War II. But still, that same ideology is still there. What they did has an impact on future generations. So in a sense, we have to say vidui for their sin. We have to say vidui for the mistakes. I prefer using the word mistakes of former generations. Because to a certain degree, that sin is ours also, because it had an impact on us. And we have to evaluate and to see, of course, they were much greater than us. But mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. So the creation of the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf, and this we see in many Midrashim, that had its impact on future generations as well. So to a certain degree, their sin was our sin. And that's why Yom Kippur, we say, Yisker and Kapel Amcha Yisrael, HaChaim B'Hamesim, even up to the Jews who left Egypt. We have to ask for kapara, for atonement, because their sin had its impact all the way down to our generation as well. Now, so this is how we can understand the Sforna. That in other words, we are recognizing the impact of the sin of the former generation. And it's interesting, last week's Sedra, Kiseitse, at the very beginning of Kiseitse, talks about Kiseitse Yifas Toar, when someone is see among the captive of a war, a woman is beautiful, and he will desire her. And there's a whole discussion. And at the end, he marries her. And that leads, our sages say, to a person who has two wives, and he favors one wife over the other. And then he favors the children of one wife over the children of the other. And then that leads to a Ben Sorah Morer, to a rebellious son. And the Gemara says from here, the Medrash says, Aveira Goreres Aveira. The sin of one sin causes another sin. First, it starts off with Yafas Toar, which is not a legal sin, but is acting improperly. And then it's not having the person who's married to two women and not having the proper attitude towards both of them. And then not having the proper attitude to the children. And then having a child who is a Ben Sorah Mora, rebellious son. He's a different person, the son. How do we say from there, one sin causes another sin? But the answer is, when we say one sin causes another sin, it's not only within one generation. One sin causes another sin. It goes down through generations. And when we have an obligation to recognize maybe our ancestors made a mistake, and maybe that is leading us astray. Maybe they made a mistake in what they did, and it is leading us to make mistakes without caring what we did. So that is the spurna. In other words, the sin of the golden calf has its impact on future generations. However, my uncle explained why it's called vidui in a different way. My uncle explained that vidui has a double element in it. This I saw at Rabbi David's book, where he mentions a lot of the thoughts that my uncle said on the Sedra. He used to attend my uncle's shiurim. And so he mentions there that the vidui on one hand is an admission of the mistake that I made. But on the other hand, the vidui that we say Yom Kippur, when we do tshuva, we have to recognize that we can do better. Not only we can do better, we will do better. Yoidolov Yodea Talumos, God has to testify that I will not return to this sin. We have to be certain that we will not return to the sin. That is true tshuva. And the vidui contains both these elements. He doesn't mention it, but I assume that that's part of the vidui. We say that's not the Yom Kippur vidui. The vidui, when a person recognizes his sin, he says, I will never return to this sin. The person has to recognize that he's capable of doing better and that he will do better. And this is why we say vidui. This is why we say vidui, maestros. Maestros, we don't say what we didn't do correctly. We say what we did do correctly, because vidui is recognition that we can and we will do better. So vidui maestros, when we say I acted properly, that's also called vidui. That's also similar to the admission prayer. And it's very interesting. The Ramban, in his commentary on Chumash, he says that the pasuk that says, "V'shavtam ad Hashem Elokecha," you shall return to your God, has a double meaning. One is, it's a command. You shall return. It's a command. You are required to return to God. A Jew who sinned and recognizes that he sinned is required to return to God. He's required to do tshuva. But then it's also a haftacha on a national level. It's a haftacha. It's a commitment from God. And as the Rambam emphasizes it also, Asidin Yisrael Lasos Tshuva, Chvar Hivticha Torah, the Torah promised that the Jewish people will return to God. And the question is, why are the same words that are used to tell us that we're required to return to God, the same words are used to tell us that we will return to God? And the answer is, tshuva is not so simple. It's not so easy. Sometimes, with the biggest, I remember I mentioned the story when my son, Shol Yosef, of blessed memory, was in the hospital. So I would take a bottle of grape juice and I would go from room to room, Shabbos in the day, and make Kiddush. Shabbos night, maybe it was. I would make Kiddush for the different Jewish patients in the hospital. And I would talk with them, and they really wanted to talk. And then I would say, can I make Kiddush for you? And more than once, the answer, no, it's too late already. They wanted to talk, and they talked in positive terms about their religious background. But when it came to making Kiddush, the expression was, it's too late already. It's too late. It's never too late. And that is the biggest prevention of doing tshuva, of returning to God, is the fear that I won't be able to do it. So the Torah, with the exact words, when it says you are required to return to God, the exact same words are read in another way also. You shall return to God. And it's talking about the community. But what is true about the community is true about the individual. In order for us to realize that we can return to God, in order for us that there should be an obligation to do tshuva, to return to God, we have to recognize that we can return to God. And this is why it's a vidui. When we say vidui, we say, I will not return to the sin. And so perhaps this is the way we could understand what my the vidui maestros. I did everything you commanded me regarding the maestros, regarding the tithes. In other words, it's called vidui because vidui emphasizes not only I sinned, but I shall do better and I will do better. And this show, the vidui here is I did do better. And I think there is a discussion about Ne'ilah, the prayer of Ne'ilah that we say on Yom Kippur. The Ne'ilah prayer that's said on Yom Kippur is said toward the end of the day. And in America, especially, we follow opinions that we could even say it, continue saying it, after the day has ended, after sunset. In fact, some say we should change the words. Hayom Yifneh, Hayom Pana. When we say it late, when we say the Ne'ilah late, the day is gone by. It's finished. So how is it that in the Chazaras Hashatz, we say the vidui, we say the admission prayer? It's no longer Yom Kippurim. You might have Tosfos Yom Kippurim, but Kapara atonement is dependent upon the day itself. So how is it that the end of the Ne'ilah, and it is the very end of the Ne'ilah, we say the vidui prayer? Chatasi avisi pashati fanecha. It's not the long vidui. Chatasi avisi pashati lefanecha. I sinned before you. I'm sorry. Ashamnu bagadnu gazalnu. I'm sorry. Ashamnu bagadnu gazalnu dibanu dofi. How is it that we say it? It's no longer Yom Kippur. What's the purpose of saying it? True, you can say it at any time. But why should we say it there immediately after Yom Kippurim? And my father explained, Rambam says that there's tshuva of kapara, there's tshuva where we seek atonement, but then there is a halacha of midarkei tshuva. After you received atonement, the tshuva process doesn't end. The tshuva process continues. In other words, a person has to reinforce. A person has to be very careful, especially about the areas where he was weak. So a person has to reinforce those areas. And it's very interesting. The Gemara says, Machlokas Tanoim, but the Gemara says, and we paskin, that sins that I already said vidui for on one Yom Kippur, I have to say in future Yom Kippurim also. So the question is, what's the purpose of saying vidui for the sins of the previous Yom Kippur? If I already have kapara, I already have atonement. Okay, regarding certain sins, kapara is somewhat delayed, but most of the sins, the kapara, I get the kapara right away according to some, and some I get it after Yom Kippur. So 10 years later, Yom Kippur, I have to repeat the vidui. Why is it that way? The answer is vidui is not just in tshuva. It's not just to get atonement, but it's to reinforce my behavior in acting in a proper way. And I think that perhaps we could explain my uncle's thought, although he doesn't explain it that way. We could explain my uncle's thought along those lines. In other words, a Baal Tshuva begins to think that he's somewhat weak. We all begin to think that we're weak. And we begin to think at certain times that we can't pass the test. We're being tested, especially where we fell. So they say, Asisi kama shertzi bisani. I did everything that you, God, commanded me. In other words, we have to reinforce in ourselves. Part of the chizuk is not just to say, God, I sinned. I recognized I sinned. I have to be mechazik myself. I have to reinforce myself that I didn't deviate, and I will continue not to deviate. So that we do when we say the vidui, Asisi kol masher tzibisani. God, I am capable of fulfilling your commandments. Sometimes my greatest weakness, my greatest excuse is that I think, but it's only an excuse, it's not a truth, that I think I'm not capable of doing it. Asisi kol masher tzibisani. God, I recognize that I am capable of doing it. So that's perhaps the reason why it's considered tshuva. Now, I want to suggest my own answer to the question. I think vidui represents the idea of responsibility of accounting. Vidui in Yom Kippur, we give an accounting of the things we did wrong. But there are times we have to give an accounting of the things that we did right, because a person doesn't always recognize what he did. And it's important to know that I did it because I was required to do it. When I give an accounting, it's because I recognize I have a responsibility. It's not enough to observe the Torah because I observe it. I have to recognize it. I have to observe the Torah because I recognize that I have a responsibility to observe the Torah. And when I have to give an accounting, it emphasizes not just that I did it, I complied, but I did it because I had a responsibility to do it. And giving an account, that shows that I have a responsibility to do it. When we have mitzvahs of the Torah, yes, many mitzvahs have reasons for them, but I have to do it. Ultimately, I have to do it because it's a command of God, and I have a responsibility towards God to fulfill those mitzvahs. And when I give an accounting, so both vidui Yom Kippur and vidui Maishros, that emphasizes the point of my responsibility of giving accounting. And my responsibility of giving accounting presses upon me the requirement. It presses upon me my requirement to recognize that I have a responsibility to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in a sense, Yom Kippur, how is the tshuva of Yom Kippur different than the mitzvah of tshuva every every day of the year. Every day there's a mitzvah of tshuva also. I know there's some that say, according to Rambam, there's no requirement of tshuva. My great-grandfather, Reb Chaim, felt otherwise. But maybe in another share I'll discuss it at length. But what is the difference? And I've mentioned this before, the difference between tshuva the rest of the year and tshuva Yom Kippur. Tshuva the rest of the year is, if I recognize that I did something wrong, I say vidui, I do tshuva. Yom Kippur is more than that. I have to evaluate myself. When you give an accounting, that implies evaluation. Yom Kippurim, tshuva requires that we evaluate ourselves, to think about things that we might have forgotten, or there are things that we thought were okay. There were things that we thought were mitzvahs. And in actuality, they were the very reverse. They were sins. So with Tshuva Yom Kippurim, it's not enough to say, God, I'm sorry. But I have to evaluate myself. And accounting implies an evaluation. We have to see what we could have done, what we did do. And when we look back, maybe we see it differently now. And this is the lesson of Vidui Maestros. It's one of recognizing that we have to give an accounting, which implies responsibility of evaluating ourselves. And we should be successful this year. We're now in Elul, preparing for Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. These are days that we not only have to do tshuva, we not only have to ask forgiveness, we not only have to ask for help, and boy, do we need it now, but we have to, the only way we can really sincerely do it is by evaluating ourselves. And this is applied by the accounting that's given by the Vidui Maestros. Okay.
Yeah, I'm having some internet trouble. Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
So if people had put questions in the chat before, I've lost them, but so please send them again. There was a good question. If we are not able to daven in a minyan because of COVID, how do we come as the community when we're not part of a minyan?
So we daven on behalf of the community, and that's how we're joining them. Everybody's situation is evaluated. It's not objective. Everybody's evaluated. Let's say someone is in the hospital, but he davens for the community, and the community davens for him. So under those circumstances, he's part of the community. It's not just the community, it's the nation of the Jewish people.
Why doesn't mentioning the sins of our ancestors take away from using their merit to beg Hashem for forgiveness?
Why doesn't it?
Yeah.
In other words, you can't have it both ways. And especially in view of what I said, because of what our ancestors did. In other words, we approach God as the nation. We can't approach God as the nation unless we assume some responsibility for them also.
Okay. Daniel, do you see any questions?
I don't have anything.
Okay. So I don't see any other questions. Oh, here's another one. Why is Yizkor limited to those who sit Shiva? Why don't we say Yizkor for everyone as part of the nation?
Well, I assume the reason probably is, but we do mention that the Sinuach B'Gan Eden that they should. Let me get the Yisker here. Okay. Let me see it. 1 second. I would assume because the children have the primary responsibility. In other words, the impact was greatest upon them, and that's what I would assume. But let me take a look. All right, I can't find it right now. It says in short, Tzadikim Tzitanios Began Eden. So, you have the want to read this? Give me a second. Just offhand, I don't have. Here. Thing. Yes, okay.
Yes, girl.
Yeah, you say because you say in the shamos Abim Yitzchak Sarif Rachav Alev in short Tzadikim Tzidkanios Shebegan Eden and Omar Amen. So it's together with everybody in Gan Eden. And then usually the Yisker also. So it's mentioned together with the others in Gan Eden. So that's all the previous generations.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what else?
Yeah, I don't see any other chats, but then I've had a lot of internet.
Oh, by the way, I have to add. This comes together with Aval Anachnu V'Avoseinu Chatanu. Avoseinu doesn't just mean our ancestors. Avoseinu means our previous generation. So Yom Kippur, besides the Yisker, in the Vidui itself, we say Aval Anachnu V'Avoseinu Chatanu. So it's talking about all future generations, all past generations.
I think that question was why do people say Yisker for their relatives and not for, well, you answered it. They say.
Because, in other words, I think we want to do something special for our ancestors, but we do include everybody when we say Aval Anachnu V'Avoseinu Chatanu. We and our ancestors sinned. You know, so that's the way I would understand it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And God willing, next week, same time, same code. And we will announce either then or the following week about if we're going to have a share not on Sunday when Rosh.
Well, we can't have it on Sunday. We can't have it on Sunday. It's Yom Tov.
Right. So we'll be announcing.
We'll announce when the share will be. Yeah, we'll announce when the share will be. Okay. That's
okay, Yashko, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining.